Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the SEMA collision repair and refinish stage. And today we're going to be talking about non-repairable bumper cover areas. So why don't we go through and just give a brief introduction of ourselves. I'll start off. Scott Van Hooley. I'm the manager of the RTS team at ICAR. Was a collision repair tech for a number of years before I started at ICAR. Went to ICAR as an instructional designer, and then started as a member of the RTS team and now manage it. Ron?
I'm Ron Reichen, president of Precision Body and Paint Companies in Oregon, past chairman of SCRS, master technician on the aluminum side in many areas of manufacture, and glad to be here and participate.
My name is Gerald Gabriel. I'm with ICAR as well. I'm in an industry relations, primarily in the tool and equipment side of things. Also help with the RTS team with Scott, and came from a collision background, shop technician, management, kind of all over the collision industry.
I am Dominic Martino, president and co-owner of Gold Coast Auto Body in Chicago. I am a newly elected board member to SCRS, so I'm just learning the ropes, and be patient with me today. Thank you.
All right, so we'll jump into this right away. So let's just start talking about some of what we're seeing with these bumper covers, because there's so many different sensors and radars and different things like that, either mounted to, behind. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing from a shop perspective that the industry really needs to pay attention to?
I think one of the biggest challenges that we're facing right now is the lack of training by the bill payers, understanding of the no repair zones or lack of repairability in certain areas where you cannot add any additional mill thickness or any type of repair filler in any areas where these sensors, which are hidden behind the bumper substrate materials, and the sensors cannot read through almost any deviation other than the OE material substrate, as well as any additional mill thicknesses of clear coats or additional base colors.
I agree with what Ron says, and in addition to that, I think the educational piece, it isn't just the technicians on the backside, it's the upfront people that our staff that need to understand, even when offering a consultation, to be able to identify a bumper that needs to be replaced with one that perhaps might be repaired. There's a substantial cost difference there, so we want to be sure that that we offer the customer the correct information right up front, because that could drive the whole experience, not only for us but for the customers. So the educational piece is very important.
You know, as a repairer, you don't want to go through the entire repair and refinishing process, reinstall the bumper, then go into calibration and find out now you can't calibrate that vehicle because of the repair and the added material on the refinish. And now, you know, you've basically wasted all of that effort, all of the labor, all the paint materials and everything else. You've got the challenge of going back to either the bill payer or the owner and explaining to them that you know, now we got to put a new bumper cover on it after we've delayed you. You've been in a rental car and all the other nuances that go along with it, and starting the process all over again and going from a far more economical repair to a new bumper cover with supply chain issues. Now it can really become a snowball effect of just a bad relationship in that repair situation.
Yeah, Ron, you make a good point, bringing up, both of you, Dominic as well, bringing that up on the front end, right? Identify on the front end during the repair planning, during the communication with the customer, what does that look like? What is that going to potentially turn into once the repair facility gets into the repair? Is that bumper a bumper that can be repaired, may not be able to be repaired, maybe something that still has to be identified once it's in the repair planning, but then how do we communicate that as an industry on the front end, looking at those OE procedures and identifying those right off the bat to make sure that you know what's got to happen with that vehicle and what's allowed, what's not allowed.
and that's a great point, because most of the clients, they just know that it works. They just know that if a car comes, in their peripheral, either they get a flash in their mirror or on the side of the mirror that there's an object that's in that lane warning situation, but they don't know where that sensor's located. So it is up to us, and it's up to the front line people, your first point of contact as an estimator. We're the experts. We have to demonstrate our professionalism, and we have to educate them and saying, because there is a sensor, even though you don't see it, it's located behind here. And if I do a repair there, we're not going to be able to calibrate this. Therefore, we're going to have to replace your bumper, even though your bill payer may be trying to settle the claim off of photos, and they're 5 states away, and they're saying, well, gee, that's got to be a repairable bumper. So there are those nuances that you're going to communicate not only to the owner of the vehicle and educate them, but also the bill payer as well.
Having just attended the OEM Technology Summit, one thing that became very, very apparent to me is the technology and the repairability of the bumpers is becoming more complex. And as Ron stated earlier today, we're no longer tradesmen. We are professionals, and in order to be able to deliver that product to our customer, it is imperative that we have the knowledge to be able to communicate that right at the outset. And in as much as some of my staff have that knowledge, there are definitely some training that needs to be done and continue. And that's one of the things that I'm going to do when I get back is get together with my team and plan out the next 6 months of training, because we're going to be getting into some heavy duty tech.
So I think one thing that we have to think about too with all of these, so it's not only there might be a non-repairable area, but some of the techniques and materials that we've used over the years might actually have an adverse effect. If you had a crack in an area where there was a blind spot sensor, and you're going to use the metal staples and things like that, or a wire screen as a reinforcement, that can really just mess up those sensors, because metal and radars go hand in hand. And when you start doing some of those repairs, even if you think it might not affect it, if it's in that wrong area, it all of a sudden now could. So are there any other points we want to make on just the repair methods that we use?
Well, I'll jump in a little bit, and you're absolutely right. And adding any type of metallic to that, but just the repair material, adding density to that substrate, whether it's a plastic repair product, SEMA's like a body filler. But we ran into a situation where a car dealer called us and said, hey, we've got a vehicle in from another shop. They've asked us to calibrate it. We can't get it to calibrate. I went over and looked at this vehicle, and they'd put an aftermarket bumper cover on this vehicle. The substrate material that the aftermarket bumper cover was made of was of a different density and was not allowing that sensor to read through that. So even though it was a new bumper, it was an aftermarket product, and the sensitivity of that density prevented that from calibrating, and therefore that bumper had to be changed back to an OE bumper cover.
Likewise, we experienced the same with our Mercedes dealer partner. We had a used vehicle. It was a pre-owned vehicle, and they were trying to certify a CPO car, a certified pre-owned, and they were having issues with the sensors, and we identified the fact that the bumper had been painted a couple of times, and in fact the bumper had to be replaced, and what the used car manager thought was going to be a profitable sale turned into they basically lost money on the job.
The vehicle that we were talking about earlier with the aftermarket bumper was a Mazda Miata. So it's not just the high-end luxury cars. I mean, this is any consumer vehicle now. It's that has that, and almost every car, Toyota from 2017 on, every one of their vehicles, from their least expensive to their most expensive, all have lane departure systems built into those vehicles.
So even we talk about non-repairable areas. It doesn't mean there's nothing on the bumper that's, you can't, it's not saying that there are no areas that you can safely repair. It's saying that you really have to pay attention to where you're doing those repairs. As the upper right corner picture is from Volvo, where they actually have you, if you're going to do any kind of repairs in the area for refinish or anything like that, and the thickness is getting too much, they actually have us strip it down. So there's quite a few things there that we have to pay attention to as well, just in the refinishing side of things.
Exactly. It could be as it may not necessarily be that you're in the area that's close to the sensor where it's restricted, but just the amount of material, paint film that you're putting on the bumper, it's very important. And as was mentioned this morning, the mill gauge is going to become the tool that you don't really use very often. It's very important. It's going to have to be measured at the outset of the repair and at the final product before it's installed back on the vehicle.
And Dominic, you touched on exactly what I was thinking with that. The repair on that bumper may be in an area of the bumper that is okay to repair. It's safe to repair. It's appropriate with the OE procedure. But if that bumper's been repaired and refinished a time already before, now all of a sudden you've got a mill thickness issue. One more refinish, even if it's just a clear. You may be doing a clear coat on that end, and it may be enough to set that off and reduce the effectiveness or stop that particular system from working.
It's a good point. And open blends, especially clear coats on urethane parts, are just an absolute. That's a disaster waiting to happen. So, even if you had, let's just say, a pair of license plate bolt impacts in the center of the bumper with the sensors that are on the outboard side, you say, okay, I can successfully do a repair with a minor amount of filler, or take the cover off and heat it from the backside, and raise out that plastic, block it flat, a couple of coats of primer, a block sand. But then as I'm refinishing that bumper, even if I don't have any pigmentation on that outboard side, but I'm adding another 2 or 3 mils of clear, that could be enough to trigger that and cause a sensitivity where it's going to fail in the recalibration time.
Exactly, and as was indicated this morning at the OEM Technology Summit, it's going to be it's going to get to a point where you're going to be replacing bumpers more often than repairing them for a variety of reasons, and that's just going to become part of the repair process.
So, we've talked a lot about the bumpers and stuff like that, but let's just explore a little bit on kind of the reason behind it with the ADAS sensors and all those kinds of things. And, park sensors, for example, are one we haven't really touched on yet. What happens if we have to do multiple refinishes on something with that?
You're going to run into the same problem, and your manufacturers do a pretty good job of dictating in their repair procedures how many times you can refinish it and what kind of mill thickness buildup you should or should not have. You can't change the color. I've seen some of the bill payers request a used park sensor. Oh, you can just refinish it and put it in because they're saving a few dimes. That's not an acceptable repair any longer. Usually, a park sensor will come from the manufacturer. If you buy it new, it'll come with their primer on it. You probably scuff it with a red Scotch-Brite pad, and then very limited number of coats of base and clear, and that's it. You get one and done. You don't get to refinish that more than one time.
I think what Ron said is on point, because unless you're accessing the OEM repair procedures and researching, we have good understanding even at the front end. When we get sensors from the dealer that need to be painted, we know exactly what needs to be done. And again, even something as simple as that, you've got to be accessing the OEM repair procedures. It's going to save you time, money, and it's a safety consideration that's very important.
Well, and Ron touched on it earlier. These are not on just high-end vehicles, right? And I think if we throw it out to the crowd, probably everybody in here has a vehicle or has been in a vehicle with something as simple as parking sensors. They're everywhere. It's not just the new and upcoming technology. It's on everything. It's something we've got to be aware of across the board.
So let's talk a little bit of, so we know that we're supposed to do the calibrations after we've done these according to the OEM procedures. But what happens when a shop maybe skips the calibration because they're trying to get the car out and maybe they did a repair in front of those sensors? You know, I think there's a real prevalent thought in the industry that it's going to automatically turn on a light or deactivate the system. Let's explore that a little bit.
I'll just speak from personal experience. My wife's vehicle was in the shop, had it in a repair facility I'm very familiar with. Very good repair facility, very well equipped. They did the repair, replaced a portion of the rear bumper cover, so it's a 2-piece rear bumper cover. Vehicle has the blind spot, lane indicators. That vehicle was repaired, was done, went through a calibration for front end damage on a headlight, went through a static calibration there, went through a calibration for the park sensors. All lights are clear, everything's good. I was out of town when my wife went and picked her vehicle up. She drove it for a couple of weeks, no issues, no lights, no indications. I got in the car, went to drive it, noticed that the blind spot alert was turned off, the little button up by my mirror. So we were on a trip. We were headed down to Georgia. We live in Tennessee. Driving highways down towards Atlanta. Anybody that's ever driven down there knows there's cars everywhere. Noticed it was off, went to turn it on. It displayed that there's an error with the system. Come to find out, there was a calibration issue. Again, did not show up on its own until you go to utilize that system. Now, thankfully, we didn't have any further issues. My wife didn't have any additional accidents, but she very easily could have been relying on that advanced driver system like so many of us do. We know it's there, we understand that it's there, and we count on it to take care of us. She could have had another accident simply because that calibration wasn't complete.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Humanoids are creatures of habit, and they become very, very accustomed to using all of the driver-assisted features that their vehicles have. And looking in that rearview mirror, turning your head before you change lanes, people just don't seem to do that anymore. They get really used to using those products, and it could create a serious liability. Let's just say there was a motorcycle in that blind spot, or another vehicle, and you're turning into it at 60 or 70 or 80 miles an hour out on the freeway. We're talking about a really serious accident and or death. So the liability, again, goes with that repairer, and we have a grave responsibility.
We had a situation like that with a 2017 Honda Civic that was repaired at another facility, and the customer was complaining, about that. And what we came to find out was that where the bumper was repaired on the side, there was such a buildup of material that the sensor in the mirror wasn't picking up that there's an obstacle there, and so the customer went to merge into a lane and struck another vehicle. So it will happen.
Mario, and I'll just touch base on something. We always think about the actual panel that sensor is mounted to. In a case of a lane departure where it's mounted to the rear body panel or the corner of the quarter panel near the vent or something like that. But if you're repairing a door at the base area of where the mirror is mounted, and you add a couple of mils of body filler, you're setting that mirror now out geographically a couple of mils away from where it was originally intended to be mounted. And that in its inception can also affect that. You say, well, I put a new mirror on it, it should be fine. But the mounting area that the mirror mounted to now has been distorted. Consequently, it's changing that ability for us to do a calibration. And a lot of that gets missed.
Well, and like Dominic mentioned as well, and to add in with what Ron's saying, these systems all talk to each other. Every single one of these sensors relies on everything else being where it's supposed to be, and that's where it's so critical that we go back to those OE repair procedures, that we go back and we look and make sure, can this be done before we do it? Make sure that we follow through on the back end to double check, check our mill thickness, to go back and do the full calibration, and to add in a whole nother topic, but a quality check afterward. Take it out, do the road test, do the checks, dynamic, make sure that these things are working.
It isn't about the it's not the visual appearance anymore. There's the you know, the safety issues, the technology that's behind it, and this is where, again, you know, understanding the repair procedures, getting in the repair procedures. If you're repairing the same type of vehicle, brand, or models, you know, Ron brought up a great idea this morning. What he does with some of his staff is making little, you know, call it a cheat sheet of particular models, and that's, you know, in our shop we do the same thing, very similar to that, but it just gives them an ability to look at it and say, okay, wait, the damages in this part of the bumper, it's going to have to be replaced. So again, going back to educating your staff, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but I think that this is imperative, especially when you consider the fact that the safety systems that are involved today have you know, very much rely on how the bodywork is being performed as well.
Yeah, to your point, Mario, we just call it the no repair zones, and you just need to identify these are zones, these are areas that we know blind spot monitors, lane departure monitors are located behind it, and you know, err always on the side of safety, and sometimes you're just going to have to say, no, I know it's just a minor scratch, but this bumper is going to have to be replaced.
So just to touch on one other point, so we're talking about all the different sensors tied into the systems. That's something that's actually pretty complicated to figure out sometimes. So we have our OEM calibration requirements search, and we've actually done a lot of that work for you. So if you have a system that's not available that is using a sensor in an area that you replaced, you might see 4 different systems or more that are no longer available or functioning, and it might be all related to that one sensor or that one repair that you did. And so that's one of the things that a lot of times the industry is always talking about the system, but we really need to focus on sensors, the locations, what's in front of them, where they mount, because that can affect so much of these safety systems. And it's pretty rare that a misaligned sensor is only going to affect one system.
I definitely agree with that. Don't have much to add to it, but yes.
Well, and we all know that everything worked perfectly before the accident. So if you're the last guy that touches it, tag you're it.
Scott, to add on in regards to the calibration tool and getting into the RTS website, I loved that from a shop perspective. I loved that when I was on the bill payer perspective and looking at it from a repair plan in conjunction with the shop. And taking a look at that, and even something as simple as, and I'm going to step away from bumpers for a minute, but Honda, as an example, common car, all over the road. You've got something as simple as a mirror on that vehicle that if you realign that door, if you R&I that door for some reason, maybe it's just a blend door, and all you're doing is R&Ing that mirror, handle, belt, that vehicle requires a calibration. And it's important for us to know that as an industry, and to know that we've got to go in, again, I'm going to say it over and over, but we've got to go back to those OE repair procedures. So we can go onto that website, we can go onto the RTS website, we can pull it up, and we can see that, hey, this vehicle, for something just as simple as taking a mirror off for a blend, now requires a calibration and an initialization of those systems.
Well, and the same thing is true just if you have to R&I a bumper cover. A lot of times they call that out as a requirement. Not always, but again, the OE procedures. So let's just talk about that. You know, the OEMs have position statements, they have their procedures, and you know, let's just talk a little bit on some of the differences of some of these OEM position statements. So GM is a good example. They actually call out the fact that they have to have that that special mill gauge so you can read plastic parts. And let's, you know, just talk a little bit about some of those differences that you have seen so far.
Well, I think what we have to understand is that every manufacturer has a little bit of a different criteria. So, we cannot just say, well, just because GM says this on their Silverado pickup, that same GM information is going to apply to a Cadillac or to a Buick or to a Hyundai or to a Kia. You've got to look it up, model specific, by VIN, every time on that. And back, it's deviating a little bit, but we're still talking about sensors. You've got radar sensors in the Toyota with the blue circles. That's their front adaptive cruise control. If you just simply R&I'd that grill, you need to recalibrate that vehicle. So you just have to think in terms of A, you've got to go to the OE repair procedures, and B, you've got to assume that anything in that related area is going to require some kind of calibration.
I was just going to add, as you said, it's important to know that not every GM vehicle is the same, but even within that, not every Silverado is the same. And some of them have one more system than another. Some of them have a different style of bumper. Some of them may have a different style grill. All of these components play a factor in it. And again, just expanding on what you said, it's critically important.
Well, and then there's the grill in the closet too. What if that truck's had a lift kit put on it? What if that truck's got rocker side guard bars on it? There's all these deviations that we have to be cognizant of. And again, we as the repairer are deemed the expert, and we are going to be held accountable for that liability.
If anything, as a parent, I think the education, knowing the procedures, we're at a point now where it's imperative on every repair, because the procedures can change from 1 month to another, and what was a procedure 4 months ago might have changed slightly. So you constantly have to be in there, and that's just it's a normal part of what we're doing every day.
Well, and even the examples that we've got on the slide, the one from Ford is dated May 3rd, 2021. If we had that vehicle in a repair facility on May 1st and completed a repair, that's great. Hopefully we looked up the procedure, but that's the importance of going back and looking that procedure up again on the 4th or again on the 5th, and not just relying on the fact that, hey, we've repaired this vehicle before. That procedure may have changed on May 3rd. So that vehicle now that you're repairing on May 3rd or May 4th needs to be repaired to that procedure, not to what you did last week.
So, and I think one of the things that, talking with a lot of the OEMs on some of these differences, a lot of times the different control modules or sensors and things like that, they might have one module or one part that's used on multiple lines, multiple vehicles, but it has a completely different software package inside. And so I think some of these nuances that we see are directly related to that, and that's where we can't apply what we had from one OEM to another and say, well, why can't they all be the same? But it really comes down to these vehicles are all very different and have different needs that need to be addressed. And I think that's one of the things that kind of helps the industry understand the why behind it. So it's not just, well, they're just pushing us to do this. There's reasons behind all of this.
So the parking sensors in the back bumper that have an outer, an inner, an outer, you mean we can't just throw them all in a bucket and put them all back in whichever spot they want to go? They all fit. They all plug in. Yeah.
Years ago, it wasn't so bad. It was more like that, but they have definitely changed, especially when you have the parallel park assist and things like that. That's where all of a sudden now those vehicles are getting software packages that are very intelligent, and they can tell how big the spot is, will the vehicle fit, and all of a sudden now if that one sensor's not reading correctly because we put too much paint on it, it's not mounted in the right location, so that's another thing that we didn't really touch on. So the park sensor, if you have it slightly off and it's mounted incorrectly because we did a repair right on that area, you could cause a problem with it.
You touched on a point that just kind of spurred my thoughts, and it was a situation where a vehicle was brought to us, and again, the rear park sensors weren't functioning correctly because of a misalignment. Well, come to find out, that they had bought, the parts department unfortunately didn't order the right bumper with the holes already in it. Somebody got the dies out and plotted where the park sensors were supposed to be and punched holes, and they were a couple of millimeters off with their park sensor locations because the painter had already painted the bumper, so we can't return it, blah, 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 blah. We've all been there and all done that. Again, forgot to mirror match the parts, and now after they were all done, now that bumper was a throwaway, and they had to go buy the actual bumper where the holes for the sensors were in the exact right location.
So when we're looking for OEM repair procedures for some of these warnings and things like that, there's not really a standard place for a lot of that. And so that's one of the reasons they bring out these OEM position statements, is to help us bring awareness of what it is. So all these position statements typically you can find within the repair procedures and repair information, but a lot of times you have to look in general areas. It's not necessarily, I've never seen one inside a procedure on how to remove a bumper cover. It's always a separate area, maybe something tied to one of the sensors. So you have to be a little bit creative about where to find that information as well.
And agree. And the position statement is designed to build awareness. You still have to get into the procedures, do the research, because there's a lot more information in there.
So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on the paint film thickness. One that, so this is one from GM where they're actually calling out the exact paint film thickness gauge. And, you know, if you think about it, this is something that I don't think we ever really did before with ADAS. So let's just talk about some of the different, like Toyota's, some of Toyota's bulletins on changing the color of a bumper.
Well, I think it just goes right back to the fact that it's all about the mill thickness. I'm sure that we have different densities in pigmentation, different density of white as opposed to, say, a yellow or maybe a tri-coat material, one that's maybe got heavier metallic particulate in it than another color. So, again, it goes back to, in this particular case, they're calling out 13 mil is not to exceed that. Now, does that not to exceed mill thickness of the paint? What about the repair material that we put on it? We know how much we put on. How much did we sand off? How many mils does the primer and the sealer represent? And then I've still got to put base on. I still got to put clear on. So it just gets to be some kind of a challenge, and you got to do all the math.
It's a whole different way of repairing bumpers now. It's not just about plastic welding and it's the paint film that makes a big difference. And that's it's if this indicates anything, it's the complexity of what we have to do today.
When you touched on it earlier, that as technicians, we really need to be professional craftsmen, right? And so our technicians need to have the mill thickness gauge. They need to understand the importance of utilizing that tool throughout the repair. Utilize it on the front end during the repair planning. Utilize it during the repair, like you just mentioned. You've got to get in there, understand where we're at now, what's it going to be next, and are we still safe?
Well, and one of the other things, anti-static. What our process for anti-static. So we're going to go paint the bumper cover. Not only does it help it match correctly, it also might help us not have all the dirt nibs, have to redo things, and helps prevent some of that as well. So all of a sudden, here's a process that we've used for quite a while just to help with making the paint finish come out better. Now it actually is helping us with this problem.
There's two schools of thought on obviously creating a ground of some type. Either the anti-static air delivery lines that have a weave within them, so they're grounded, and the other is old school, an alligator clip down to a wet floor, to where you're creating some form of grounding methodology, so that you're not getting that static transmission. And again, it could be a safety issue too, especially depending on humidity you're wiping that down with a grease and wax remover. We had a fire in a paint booth where a guy was just simply wiping it down with his solvent. It wasn't grounded, and it started on fire because of the static.
All right, so that brings us to the end here. Were there any questions from the audience?
It won't go out there. It'll feedback. He'll have to come up. It'll feedback. Come on up. Come on up.
Yeah, I do a calibration store in Massachusetts, and I had a customer send me I had a customer send me a 2018 Nissan Pathfinder, and I went to go calibrate the front radar, and I couldn't get the calibration to happen. I looked at the sensor, it looked kind of weird, so I said, you know what, I think this thing is bent. So we did change out the sensor. We got a couple of DTCs cleared out on it. But all in all, it would not calibrate. And then when we found out, it was the ABS system. It wasn't sending out enough voltage, so it shut down the whole front of the ADAS system. So we sent it to the dealership. There was a code for the transmission, which was covered underneath warranty, and somebody had replaced the ABS module and coded it incorrectly, and that DTC kept it all from getting programmed.
I think it just supports the fact that there's just multiple pieces to the puzzle that we deal with now. It's just not as simple as it used to be, and we'll never go back. It's only going to become more complex, not less.
I agree, and again at the OEM Technology Summit, it became very apparent in some of the diagrams that they were showing, and this is the new way. I mean, it's where we're going. It's built as a system, and if one part of the system isn't correctly repaired, it can affect multiple systems. So it's not just about how it looks, or there's so much more to it now. That even as what was considered a simple bumper repair is not. It's a complex repair.
I don't think there's a truly such thing as a simple repair in our industry anymore.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and have a great show.